Good morning, everyone. Let me take you back to London in December of 1952. For 5 days, one of the world's great cities simply disappeared into a cloud of its own making. What we now call the Great Smog was not a natural fog. It was a man-made catastrophe. And in the weeks that followed, it would quietly claim more lives than many wartime bombing raids. Today I want to show you what happened, why it happened, and why its lesson still matters more than 70 years later. Look at this image, a bus conductor walking ahead of his bus with a flare because the driver could not see the road. This was December the 5th, 1952. In some streets, people literally could not see their own feet. Public transport ground to a halt, sports events were canceled, and cinemas closed because you couldn't see the screen. The fog wasn't just outside. It came indoors, into living rooms and even hospital wards. This wasn't a nuisance. It was a city-scale emergency. And here's the crucial point. This fog was made of smoke, not just water vapor. The disaster needed two things to align. First, the weather. On the 4th of December, a high-pressure system, an anticyclone, parked itself over London and refused to move. That created what's called a temperature inversion. Cold air stuck underneath a lid of warmer air, so nothing could rise or disperse. Second, the fuel. London was a city that ran on coal, 5 power stations along the Thames, and millions of homes burning coal in open fireplaces. Put those two together, a sealed city and an endless supply of smoke, and you get a chemical fog of sulfur dioxide and soot. Neither factor alone would have caused the catastrophe. Together, they were lethal. The timeline is brutally short. On the 4th of December, the anticyclone settled in. By the 5th, the smog had thickened into what Londoners called a pea-souper, a fog between 100 and 200 meters deep. Over the next 3 days, the city seized up. Ambulances struggled to move, football matches were called off, and the first deaths began. On the 9th of December, the wind finally changed and the smog cleared, but that was not the end. As you'll see next, the real toll was only beginning to be counted because the smog kept killing for weeks after it lifted. Now let's look at the number that matters. 12,000 people. That's the modern estimate of excess deaths in the weeks and months after the smog. The official figure released at the time was just 3,000, but the reality was far worse. Funeral directors across London reported a surge in bodies so large that the demand for caskets was insatiable, and florists ran out of flowers. Tens of thousands more were hospitalized with respiratory illness. Watch the line climb. That's not a data point. That's 12,000 individual lives, most of them the elderly, the very young, and people already ill. One historian captures the horror better than any statistic. Kate Winkler Dawson, in her Death in the Air, records what the city's undertakers saw first. Let me read it again. Across London, funeral directors reported a surge in bodies, so many that the demand for caskets was insatiable. Think about that phrase, insatiable. The funeral industry itself couldn't keep up. This quote matters because it reminds us that the first people to understand the scale of the disaster were not politicians, but the ordinary workers who handled its consequences. Now, how did the government react? The answer, sadly, is hardly at all. The official response was, frankly, a failure. Londoners had seen thick fogs before, and the Conservative government treated this one as just another pea-souper, nothing to worry about. Public health authorities downplayed the polluted air, and the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, never made a single public comment about the event. The government's own tally that week was 3,000 deaths, a figure we now know badly understated the truth. Harold Macmillan, then Housing Minister, argued against cutting coal burning, citing what he called broad economic considerations. In hindsight, many historians believe the true gravity was deliberately concealed. The lesson here is uncomfortable. The state's first instinct was to protect the economy and its own image, not the people breathing the air. But here's where the story turns. The Great Smog was so shocking that it forced a permanent change in how Britain, and eventually the world, thinks about air. In the years after 1952, scientists began to study air pollution and health in earnest, and the public could no longer be told that dirty air was harmless. The direct result was a law we'll look at next, the Clean Air Act of 1956. Notice the image. a light bulb turning on above an open book. That's exactly what happened. Knowledge finally became policy. So let's see what that policy actually did. The Clean Air Act of 1956 was the first serious piece of modern air quality legislation. It created smoke control zones where burning dark smoke was banned, and it pushed both households and industry towards smokeless fuels. It also made air quality something measurable and enforceable, rather than something you simply endured. And the numbers show how far we've come. Research modeling the old 1952 fuel mix shows it would increase nitrogen dioxide by 22% and fine particulates by 230% across Greater London today. The law didn't just clean up London, it gave the world a template. And yet, as we'll see, the story is not over. So, let me leave you with the lasting lesson. The Great Smog of 1952 was not an act of nature. It was a choice, made by a society that prioritized cheap coal and easy economics over the air its citizens breathed. The Clean Air Act proved that regulation can save lives at enormous scale. But the story isn't finished. Air pollution was still linked to around 4,000 London deaths in 2019 and roughly 7 million deaths globally every year. Worse, the burden still falls hardest on the poorest and most deprived communities. The fog has lifted, but the lesson hasn't. Clean air is not a luxury, it's a public health commitment, and it's ours to keep making. Thank you.